afternoon. This is a video about preaching without notes. It's a revision of a video I did some time ago, but I was asked to give an example of a sermon that I preached, and so we videoed a sermon, and this video is a revision of the last one, which is done in reference to the sermon I preached. So the link to that sermon is below, and you can listen to that now or later on if you like. So, preaching without notes. Why bother? Well, from my point of view, and this is a very personal point of view, if I am preaching with notes, I start reading the notes, and then of course I want to engage with the congregation, and I look up and then I look back at my notes, and it takes me 10 minutes, or that's how it feels to me, to find my place and get myself started again. It feels like a disaster, it's stressful for me, and it almost certainly looks weird to the congregation. Maybe you can preach with notes, so why should you perhaps try preaching without? Well, there is that sense of engagement. It has the feeling of being relaxed, and that feeling of having a conversation much more than issuing a diatribe. I have seen people preach fantastically well with notes, so I am by no means saying that this is the only way. There are, it seems to me, advantages. There are downsides too, and perhaps the one that grates most is that people do get the idea that it is easy, and after some sermons, people have said to me, "Isn't it wonderful that you can preach off the cuff?" No, I cannot preach off the cuff. If there's any lack of preparation, it shows straight away. There's a lovely quote from Fred Astaire where he basically says, if it doesn't look easy, we haven't worked hard enough yet. It's the preparation, it's the practice that makes it look easy, and if it doesn't look easy, and if it doesn't flow nicely, that is a sign of lack of preparation. It will be interesting to see what you think about how well I prepared the sermon that follows this video. So, there are real advantages, there are disadvantages. One of the other disadvantages, of course, is that you can lose your way. Decent preparation not only reduces the chance of losing your way, it means that you stand a much better chance of seamlessly getting back on track. But it can happen. Digressions cost time, and so one of the signs of a bad sermon, or badly prepared sermon, is that they are longer than you anticipate. And I have to say that the sermon that I have used as an example is longer than I expected it to be when I started preaching it. I'd be interested just to hear what you think about that. I will at the end give some of the things I noted. But what is the method? How do we get there? Preparation, as I say, is everything. If I'm preaching on a Sunday, I will start preparation on a Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. And the idea is simply at this stage to read the Bible passages and engage with them, to any other material that I need to be including in the sermon and becoming familiar with it. I think of it as mapping, so I'm not trying to get anywhere at the moment. I'm simply trying to understand the material and what it looks like from different perspectives, using whatever resources I've got to hand. Different translations, maybe even wrestling with my rudimentary Greek, possibly looking at commentaries. I then start talking to myself, and this can look utterly bonkers, but technology does come to our aid, remarkably. I've got these lovely earbuds that I put on, and it means that I can go for a walk and start talking to myself. And people think I'm having a lovely conversation with Great Aunt Fanny rather than preaching at myself. When I was a stipendiary priest, church was just over the road, and I'd just nip across the road and preach there, and that worked well. I'd just talk through the material, and eventually, as in any sort of conversation like that, you end up with, hang on, this is where I want to go. You end up with a destination. Now you have a map and you have a destination. The next stage is actually using the same sort of technique, but now I'm thinking about where I start from and where I'm going to. And of course, all the mapping exercise means that I've got lots of resources that I can use. Don't have to use them all. That's a big mistake. Editing down at this stage is a key part. So I start to get what sounds like a sermon. And because I'm doing it in a conversational way, just as if I was having a personal chat with you about a passage, things had come to mind, examples, conversations that I've had that seem interesting, and I'll throw them into a conversation. So that's where I get most of my illustrations and any sort of secondary material from. I might want to go back and do some homework. I'm sure I've read somewhere about, I go and search it and that sort of thing. So then I end up with a sermon. The next thing is, how on earth am I going to deliver this sermon? And so as I go through, I am looking for critical waypoints. These are the points in the sermon which, if I miss, I am off track. There will be lots of material in between, and one of the ways to test if you've got your waypoints right is, what happens if I miss a little bit out? And if you've got your waypoints right, you are dealing with one waypoint and you're heading to the next waypoint. And if some of the intermediate things drop out, you're not going to lose a huge amount. Your sermon will still work. It won't be as effective, perhaps, as you had originally planned, but it will still work. And being confident in your waypoints is what gives you the guts to stand up and actually deliver a sermon without notes. So that's the next stage. The final stage is to rehearse it. Now, this is in any way critically important. It's getting the waypoints in your mind, reinforcing them, and the intervening and practicing the intervening steps. If you happen to be preaching twice or more on a Sunday, then actually doing good rehearsal immediately before the sermon that you're preaching can stop you preaching two sermons. The nightmare on a Sunday is to have two sermons on similar subjects, and it is so tempting to end up preaching both sermons at one time. So you've got to have your waypoints clear in your mind and rehearse them before the sermon, before the service, immediately before the service. And I'm talking about within the hour before, finding time in that stretch, especially if you are preaching more than one sermon on a particular occasion. So then we come to delivery. The sermon that I am using as an example, as I say, is down below. It was preached on the first Sunday after Christmas 2024, and the readings are a passage from Colossians, where Paul is encouraging the congregation to bear with one another and to be kind and loving towards one another. And of course, this is in the context of Jew and Gentile coming together. And Jesus as a boy in the temple. So, what were my waypoints? You might want to listen to the sermon now or after I've told you what the waypoints are. If you're a glutton for punishment, you might end up doing both, but I don't recommend that. My waypoints. Paddington 3, Conclave. The Dean of the Conclave, Dean Thomas's sermon, certainty. Certainty is a sin? Question mark. Examples of certainty causing division in the church. Examples of certainty causing division in our national life. Question. If certainty is a sin, does that condemn us to being wishy-washy, mushy, yuck? That's a sort of hiatus. Stop and think. Moving towards the response to that, Jesus in the temple. Jesus asking questions and Jesus listening. Setting a pattern for his adult ministry. Intermediate waymarks, which I thought were important to remember. Syrophoenician woman, Bartimaeus, Jesus in the garden asking God if there's a way out, and Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then my next waymark is confidence. Confidence in the relationship with God. I'm going to draw the sermon to a conclusion by encouraging people not to think about New Year's resolutions, but about ambitions, and to give a couple of examples of those. Strongly influenced, I have to say, by ambitions that I am setting for myself this year. So that is the sermon. You might, as I say, like to listen to it now. I've got a few comments about how it worked. I'll come to those in a moment. It's interesting to think about reviewing the sermon about a couple of points. I discussed with the person who was leading the service whether I should robe, and we felt that it was not necessarily appropriate, and it kind of felt wrong. I am not sure about that. It was a Eucharist, and my inclination is to robe for those. That's a matter of tradition and local practice and that sort of thing. The other thing is, do you use a lectern in spite of not having notes? A lectern can root you and stop you wandering around. And it also means that people who are all over the place with their hands have something to anchor them with. And that might have been an advantage. I'd be interested to know what you think. So into slightly more detail, there are lots of little points which I would have picked up on. Essentially, the sermon was longer than I anticipated. I'd thought of it being 13 minutes, less than a quarter of an hour, and it was something over 17. I think it was too long for the material. If you've got enough to say, and if there's plenty to say and it needs to be said, you take as long as you take. I think that sermon should have probably been less than a quarter of an hour. And you get intimations that the rehearsal hadn't been quite as good as it should have been. Perhaps it was because I was settling in, but quite close to the beginning at 33 seconds to be precise, if you want to look it up, then I tried to say that in Paddington 3, Olivia Colman is a gangster version of Maria from The Sound of Music, who's been promoted to Mother Superior. Now, when I say it like that, which is what I intended, it kind of flows and it's relatively compact. I do say everything, but not in that order, and it gets a bit of a mess. A couple of things to say about that. One is it probably is something that I should have rehearsed more. There will be lines that you need to get in that you simply rehearse and say verbatim. And that should have been one of them. I shouldn't have tripped up over that. Right. Then at about when I'm starting to talk about Jesus in the temple listening and asking questions, one of the things that I had considered, and this is the deadly sin of preaching without notes, I had thought about talking about Mary pondering and decided that there was too much to say, that it would have made my sermon too long to start with. And I found myself talking about Mary pondering these things. If you notice it, it's at 9 minutes 18 seconds. And do you know what? I should never have gone there. I start and then realise I'm making a mistake and move on. There's something similar happens a little while later at 10 minutes 20 seconds. This is where I've been talking about the Syrophoenician woman. I don't refer to her by name, or by that reference. We don't know her actual name. There's a lot that can be said about that as well, but that's not for now. But she is regularly referred to as the Syrophoenician woman, and the congregation would probably, or a significant number of the congregation would have known who the Syrophoenician woman was. I don't know why I didn't actually use that name. Perhaps I was distracted by that thought as I was preaching. Distraction is a danger in preaching without notes. But I start, and this is because I love Mark's Gospel and I've spent a lot of time with Mark. And in Mark, the feeding of the 4,000, where there are 7 loaves of bread and 7 baskets collected, follows fairly closely after this. And it's my opinion that Jesus realizes with the Syrophoenician woman that his ministry is larger than he previously anticipated, and that finds expression in the feeding of the 4,000. And I start to talk about that. That is not what this sermon was about. It was a distraction, and I had to row myself back. In doing that, I think I really quite messed up, because I then go straight into Bartimaeus, and it sounds as though, as I listen to it, dear old Bartimaeus is the answer to the Syrophoenician woman, and that's... I don't think it causes a problem in the sermon. There are points that I think I could have done an awful lot better. As I say, the sermon was too long. But I think that at the end of it, people came up to me and said that I had helpfully made them think, and quite a few people did. It had clearly struck a chord and been reasonably effective. Your thoughts? What do you think? How would you have done it are the most important questions, and how would you have prepared better than I did? Many thanks for listening, and I hope that something of this enriches your preaching. God bless, and bye for now.